Pretty Little Liars is a teen mystery show that premiered on TV for the first time in 2010. It is based on the book series of the same name written by Sarah Shepard and adapted to TV by Marlene King. It begins with Aria Montgomery returning home to Rosewood after spending a year in Iceland. We learn that her absence was caused by her father's affair, and more importantly, the disappearance of one of her best friends, Alison De Laurentiis. This sets up the first part of the main mystery. What happened to Alison and where is she? We also find out that on the night Alison disappeared, she wasn't alone. She was with her 4 friends, including Aria, and ever since Alison disappeared, the 4 girls have been estranged. So when Aria returns to Rosewood, she reconnects with the other 3 girls, Spencer, Emily, and Hannah. A lot has changed since they last saw each other, but what hasn't changed is that Alison, even in her absence, still seemed to influence their lives in a major way. This becomes even more apparent as girls start receiving threatening messages from someone calling themselves A. Naturally, the first thought is that Alison is behind it, and this introduces the second part of the main mystery that carried the show for so long. Who is A? Why does A know everything? Everyone wanted to know who A really was. While Pretty Little Liars was airing, Marlene King frequently posted tweets that weren't just promotional, but hinted at mystery-related details, encouraging fans to dig deeper into episodes or elements of the story. Fans filled notebooks with clues, trying to figure out who A was long before the show confirmed it. But over time, it became obvious that the writers were winging a lot of the storylines, and that A was almost always someone whose character was made up specifically to be A, simply because no one saw it coming. Despite all its flaws, all the plot holes, all the weird storylines it has, one of the best parts of the show is its characters. In the pilot episode, it is established that the show has 4 main characters: Aria, Spencer, Emily, and Hannah. Rewatching the show as an adult made one thing very clear. These girls go through an absurd amount of trauma, and the show does not spread that trauma equally on all 4 characters, nor does it affect them all the same. On the surface, the liars are meant to be balanced, but in reality, some of them are allowed to grow and change more compared to the others. That imbalance grows worse with every season, and it fundamentally shapes how we remember each of them. When we compare all 4 of the girls and what they've been through, it becomes easy to conclude that Aria is the least affected by A. If it weren't for her forbidden relationship with Ezra, A would hardly have anything to use against her at all. Her family is occasionally placed in danger, but those moments are brief and never allowed to reshape her character. The trauma she experiences, being kidnapped, killing Shauna, or showing fear for a fleeting moment after the dollhouse, does not lead to any lasting change. On top of that, her character ultimately ends up in the same place where she began, in Rosewood with Ezra. Ironically, when you take all of this into consideration, Aria is the character who most convincingly could have been A. Turning Aria into the antagonist could have given purpose to her emotional detachment and explained why she never seemed as cornered as the others. Instead, she ends up trapped and defined almost entirely by a single relationship, while everything else about her character's personality simply fades into the background. Hannah and Emily are the opposite of this. The 2 of them go through a lot, and A never lets them take a breather. They're also the 2 most human characters, especially Hannah. Hannah is never spared from trauma inflicted by A. She is thrown into the worst possible situations, and unlike Aria, the show lets those situations actually affect her character. What makes Hannah stand out is how human she feels. Ashley Benson gives her pain weight because when Hannah cries, it feels real. Her trauma does not simply vanish between episodes. She is allowed to react, to spiral, to cope with it. One thing that stood out was Hannah's reaction to Alison's comeback. Unlike the other girls, Hannah went into an identity crisis. She changed her wardrobe, her hair, and started drinking, all of that to run away as far as possible from the pretty blonde girl persona she built for herself in Alison's absence. Alison's comeback provoked Hannah into feeling inadequate and feeling like she was only a replacement, a pretty popular girl who could have existed when Alison was not there. The same realism appears after the dollhouse, when she strips her room trying to regain control over her environment. Unlike some of the other liars, Hannah's trauma does not reset, it accumulates, and she's allowed to show it from time to time. Emily's character is not spared from trauma either. She begins the series as a swimmer whose passion for swimming gives her both structure and identity, even as she internally struggles with who she is. Over the course of the show, Emily changes significantly, evolving from the group's weakest link into one of the most emotionally strongest characters, A repeatedly targets her in deeply personal ways, ultimately costing her the one thing she was truly good at, her swimming career. Losing that future is not just a setback, but a core identity loss, and it fundamentally alters her path. Emily's coming out storyline is one of the show's most genuinely human arcs, especially at a time when queer teen characters were still rare in television. However, the show often mishandles what comes after. Many of her relationships are unsafe, inappropriate, or outright harmful. Still, Emily grows despite this. Being forced to kill Nate in self-defense is a defining moment, as the quietest liar becomes the first to cross an irreversible line. That trauma never truly leaves her, and it shapes who she becomes. After the time jump, Emily feels lost, directionless, and emotionally worn down, a reaction that feels painfully realistic given everything she has been through. But by the end of the series, Emily emerges as the emotional backbone of the group. The losses she endures do not break her, but they change her completely, making her stronger. Spencer Hastings is arguably the most psychologically complex character in Pretty Little Liars. Introduced as the overachiever, Spencer builds her identity around perfection, intelligence, and control, believing that excellence is the only way to earn love and safety. A exploits this relentlessly. Unlike the others, Spencer is attacked not just through threats, but through manipulation of her mind, her memories, and her sense of self. She is pushed into addiction, gaslit about her own sanity, and repeatedly framed as unstable, a label her family is far too willing to accept. Much of Spencer's trauma is intensified by her relationship with adults, who consistently cross boundaries and place emotional burdens on her that no teenagers should ever have to carry. Despite this, Spencer refuses to disengage from the mystery. She becomes the group's strategist, researcher, and problem solver, often sacrificing her own well-being to protect the others. At some point, the writers took the role Alison was meant to play as the center of the mystery and handed it to Spencer instead, not because it served the story better, but because they needed a twist no one could predict. Spencer's adoption storyline is a perfect example of this. It's thrown into the chaos of the Hastings family's endless secrets. It feels less like a long-planned character arc and more like something hastily introduced to surprise the audience because it was something no one expected. They never give her time to process this, for us to see what she learns from it, how it changes her. It just happens and the show ends. Alison De Laurentiis worked as a character because she was a myth, a queen bee who ruled Rosewood through fear and fascination, a girl everyone feared yet wanted to be. Her disappearance wasn't just a plot point, it was the engine that carried the show for 4 whole seasons. She was the reason A existed and the reason why the 4 liars were even connected. In the first couple of seasons, Alison is presented almost like a teenage sociopath. She had this fearless, manipulative persona and was someone who walked through Rosewood knowing she had something on everyone. And the night she disappeared, Alison was busy. She sprinted around town, burning bridges, creating enemies, exposing secrets, and somehow she managed to get attacked, buried alive, rescued, and sent into hiding, all in the same 24 hours. But beneath all that chaos, there was something real, a deeply insecure girl hiding behind a persona sharp enough to cut anyone who got too close. Her family was full of secrets that would warp any teenager's sense of safety. When you put all of that together, her cruelty towards people reads differently, not just as wickedness, but as a shield. Still, the show never fully committed to exploring that. We only got glimpses of a traumatized kid hiding behind a mask. For 2 years, Alison was on the run. She was a 15-year-old girl living alone in weird places, traveling to multiple states, staying with random adults, getting help from mysterious men, and the show expects us to believe all of this just sort of happened because she is charming. The problem isn't that Alison lived a complicated life, it's that the writers wanted grit and darkness while still pretending it was a light-hearted teen mystery. When Alison finally came back in season 4, the clues had been there for ages, so the reveal wasn't surprising, but what followed was. The writers had no idea who Alison was supposed to be. For years, she worked because she was a memory, everyone's fear, guilt, and trauma rolled into one person. But as an actual character interacting with the group, she didn't fit. No longer the untouchable queen bee, Alison is forced to confront the damage she caused, yet the show struggles to fully commit to either her redemption or her darkness. As a result, she exists in a liminal space, neither villain nor victim, where her sharp instincts are dulled and her manipulative intelligence is softened. What remains is a character haunted by her past, searching for belonging, but no longer driving the narrative the way she once did. Mona is the show's first antagonist, the best one it ever had. Mona is layered, entertaining, deeply intelligent, and unlike most of the villains that came after her, her actions make sense within the context of the story. Her motives are grounded. She was bullied by Alison for years, and A became her coping mechanism, a way to reclaim power and give Alison a taste of her own cruelty. What also makes Mona interesting is how her friendship with Hannah complicates everything. Making Mona Hannah's best friend added depth to both characters and made Mona's turn as A far more personal. To an outsider, her decision to revive A just because she saw Hannah reconnect with Spencer might seem like an overreaction, but for Mona, who struggled with a fragile sense of belonging and clear signs of untreated mental health issues, it aligned with how she processed fear and jealousy. It wasn't rational, but it felt logical to her, and the show allows just enough glimpses into that instability to make her choices understandable, even when they're extreme. Of course, Mona's storyline is not perfect. The show expects us to believe that a teenage girl was somehow able to have a threatening omnipresence, all while being a straight-A student who never missed a day of school. But Mona is charismatic enough that all of this is much easier to ignore. Still, the brilliance of Mona's original arc shines through rewatches. Seasons 1 and 2 leave real traceable clues pointing directly at her. Even though Janelle Parrish herself at first did not know Mona would be A, the setup is there from the beginning, and it's incredibly satisfying to revisit the early seasons and catch all the foreshadowing the later villains never got. In the end, Mona remains the first and last A who truly fits the mystery the show set up. Her later storylines weakened her impact, and yes, the logic behind some of her schemes strains belief, but as a character, she's one of the few in Pretty Little Liars who combines motive, opportunity, intelligence, and emotional depth in a way that actually works. Mona proves that the show could be tightly plotted and character-driven, at least when the writers wanted it to be. After Mona, the show expanded the A mythology into something far more ambitious, but also far more confusing. Each new villain, first Cece Drake and then Alex Drake, was introduced with the promise of raising the stakes, deepening the mystery, and surprising the audience. Instead, these twists exposed just how much potential was being discarded in favor of rushed motives, unexplored identities, and plot reveals that seemed designed purely to one-up viewers rather than tell a meaningful story. Cece Drake, later revealed as Charles De Laurentiis, then as Charlotte De Laurentiis, then as Charlotte Drake, is the clearest example of wasted potential. The show positioned her as the mastermind behind years of torment, yet never committed to logically explaining why. Her mental illness was treated like a convenient plot tool rather than a genuine emotional foundation. We're told that she spent years in Radley, that she had breakdowns, that she was dangerous, but we're rarely shown the psychological journey that would logically lead her to creating one of the TV's most elaborate torture operations. The show relied on statements instead of storytelling. Charlotte's storyline only got more confusing the more you examined it. The decision to make her trans was poorly handled, especially during a time when representation of any kind was limited. The show leaned toward harmful stereotypes instead of crafting a sensitive or nuanced narrative. Even the smaller details didn't add up, like Jessica De Laurentiis buying matching clothes for both Alison and Cece, even though Cece was far older and the clothes Alison wore as a young teen would not suit Cece at that age. Moments like this made Cece feel not just like a bad A, but a character forced into a storyline that did not fit her. The revelation of Cece Drake actually being Charles De Laurentiis, Alison's brother, shocked the audience in season 6. Everything that was built for her character got destroyed in season 7, when they out of nowhere introduced Alex Drake, Spencer's secret twin. Alex Drake was Marlene King's invention, designed to prove that the audience could never predict the end. And of course we couldn't. Alex's character and motives were pulled out of thin air, with no groundwork or meaningful build-up. Like Charlotte, Alex had the ingredients for a powerful, tragic antagonist: her resentment towards Spencer, who grew up with everything Alex never had, anger at being abandoned, envy of the life she should have shared. But instead of examining that pain, the show gave us a cartoonish villain with a questionable accent and a master plan that defied logic. Alex's fury at the Hastings family is introduced introduced and resolved in mere minutes. Her loneliness, her longing for connection, her jealousy, all reduced to a gimmick. Had the writers explored Alex with the same emotional depth that they reserved for Spencer, her arc could have become a compelling descent into darkness. Instead, it patched over leftover plot holes that writers did not know what to do with, and somehow still didn't explain why the other girls were tormented. In fact, if Alex hated Spencer so much, the Liar's Lament storyline in season 7 makes no sense. She barely put Spencer in any danger while brutalizing the others. That pattern of carelessness becomes even clearer with the show's most disturbing choice, forcefully implanting Emily's embryo into Alison. It was framed as a shocking twist, but it was narratively unjustified and deeply uncomfortable. It existed not to explore trauma or ethics, but simply to push Emily and Alison into a storyline that the writers did not know how to build organically. Ultimately, A evolved from a sharp commentary on bullying and isolation into a symbol of narrative desperation. Cece and Alex both could have been psychologically rich antagonists, shaped by trauma, identity struggles, abandonment, and family secrets. Instead, they became reminders of what happens when a story outgrows its own logic and loses sight of its characters' humanity. Pretty Little Liars often treats relationships between adults and minors as if they're edgy, forbidden love stories rather than abusive power imbalances. And when things go wrong, the blame is almost always placed on the teenage girl. The clearest example is without doubt Arya and Ezra. Even if we ignore the later retcons, the original setup is already disturbing. Arya lies about her age, yes, but Ezra is the adult. He finds out she is his student, a 16-year-old girl, and he still decides to pursue her. The show frames this as a tragic love story, as if his choice is noble or romantic. But then inexplicably, the writers made it even worse by revealing that Ezra actually did know who Arya was the whole time. So not only does he intentionally pursue a minor, but he also has ulterior motives. And as if this wasn't bad enough, the writers later admit he once dated Alison when she was 15, again relying on the excuse that she just seemed older. Spencer's interaction with young adult men is no different. Her relationship with Ren is very unsettling, and the fact that it is always her to be blamed for it, but never an adult man who knew what he was doing. After some time, even her relationship with Toby becomes quite problematic when he becomes a police officer, all while she's still a high school student. Suddenly, the imbalance between them is massive. The police in Rosewood in general behaves more criminally than most other characters. They stalk young girls, kiss them, and interrogate them without their parents' presence. When you watch it all together, it becomes painfully clear why the girls never asked their parents or teachers for help with A. Why would they? The adults in their lives proved over and over that they were either incompetent, abusive, predatory, or completely uninterested in protecting them. Still, even with all its flaws and missed opportunities, Pretty Little Liars remains one of my favorite shows from when I was a teenager, because I can acknowledge its problems while also recognizing how much fun it was and how much nostalgia it still carries for me. First of all, thank you so much for watching this video. I honestly never expected my previous video to get the attention it did. It still feels unreal that this channel now has 18 subscribers, considering the last time I posted anything, there was just one subscriber. And even then, that one person meant a lot to me. I really want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart. You genuinely made my year. Thank you for watching these videos, and see you again next year.